Our next speaker is really interesting. He's has the ability to really kind of, I've seen a speech from him talking about the evolution of wellness and how, as a species, as humans of species, how have we evolved in terms of our connection with wellness? And I think it's very interesting, which is why he's here today to talk. And he's going to be talking about a lot of the things that we have tended to distance ourselves through based on kind of modern belief or ideals. But I think he has a lot of compelling things to challenge people on that. So please welcome Mr. Elliot Dacher.
Well, thank you, Ted, and thank Christy and the volunteers and the others that have made it possible for me to be here and share with you today. I come here with a somewhat strange background. I'm a physician, and I have 2 medical educations. The first one was my traditional 12-year medical education, followed by my internship, my residency, and 20 years of practice in internal medicine in Washington, D.C. The second medical education was another 12 years, which I spent in Asia and India, 2 to 6 months each year annually, studying Eastern philosophy and contemplative practices to try to learn about the second aspect of healing, inner healing. So I come to you with this strange double medical education to speak to you today. I want to begin with a story from the East. There's so many stories, really, they tell in the East, and this is about a farmer. A young man goes out to the desert early in life, and he finds a little field. He builds a hut, and he begins actually for the next 50 years of his life to farm this arid land, really making by with a minimal living, minimal amount of food for himself, meager possessions. And towards the end of his life, a wise man, a clairvoyant, comes around, wandering the desert as they often do. And he looks at this man's life, and he looks at his cottage, and he says to him, you know, 1,000 years ago, a king came out to this desert, and he buried a great treasure. And that treasure is right underneath your house. And if you would have dug for that treasure, you could have lived a life with great wealth without all the struggle and poverty that you've lived with. Now, this is not just a story from the East. You find the same story in Plato's Republic, which Plato tells us about prisoners who were chained together in a cave looking at the wall, and all they can see are shadows which they believe to be the nature of reality. And when those shackles are broken, they're slowly able to walk out of the cave into the sun and see the nature of reality and the wealth that comes from really the fullness of life. It's really the same story, whether it's the sun or whether it's the gold. They're both giving us the same message. And what is that message? That message is that innately within each of us is not the capacity for suffering that is an acquired state, but innately in each of us is a quality of wealth and possibility that we not only don't touch, but we don't know, because we don't know what we don't know. What has this been called by all the great traditions or all the great religions and philosophy? Well, Aristotle in our tradition called the eudaimonia. By this he meant, in the Greek tradition, the true, which is the nature of beingness and presence, the truth, on the very basis of our life, not what we think, but who we are. The good, compassion, kindness, and the beautiful, the ability to see all as part of this great divine picture. So the true, the good, and the beautiful was the Greek expression of it. The Christian expression of it is divine love and compassion in the form of agape. In Buddhism, it's called compassion and wisdom. In Hinduism, it's called Satchitananda, existence, awareness, bliss. There is this recognition of this golden wealth that is within each of our lives that we can't have unless we go and look for it. That is possible for all of us. Now, how do we get a sense of what this is? How do we know? Well, we have moments in life, a communion with nature, the first couple of weeks of a romantic relationship, the embrace of love at its sexual peaks, the peak of athletic activity, music, dance. We get these moments when the self disappears. We're simply present in this wonderful moment of complete absorption with no distinction between I and other, this and that, past and present, you and me. And in that moment, there's a complete ease, a complete effort, a complete effortlessness, a complete sense of relaxation, a complete joy. And if we died in that moment, it would all be complete, and we know it. If you take that moment and stretch it out to a lifetime, because that is what we are told by the great ones, it's our innate gift. We've just forgotten it. That is what is called this great wealth, this gold, the sun, and in our times, increasingly human flourishing. Now, why is that so important? Not only for our own lives. It's often quoted in settings like this, the great words of Gandhi, be the change that you want to see happen in the world. Now, Gandhi, of course, he meant that if you hang around the East long enough, you know everything they quote, everything they say has multiple levels. So, of course, he meant if you want to, in our terms, have a small carbon footprint in the world, do it in your own life. Want other people to recycle in your own life. That's the coarse understanding of it. Gandhi was a great yogi. He understood the great traditions of the Vedanta and the Upanishads. He knew what it was to be, the depths of one's being, the flourishing of one's nature. And so when he says, be the change that you want to see happen in the world, he doesn't mean do it. He means be it within your own life. Because if you come to that within your own life, then the world will change as a result of the luminosity and presence that comes from that. And that is how it was with Gandhi and all great ones. It wasn't what he did, it was who we are, who he was, because he understood the nature of human flourishing in the Hindu tradition. So they not only told us about this, but they knew, just like the story about the farmer, we can't see it. It's covered with dirt. Dirt, our emotional afflictions, our overactive mind, our striving, our tendencies to want to achieve, our grasping in the outside world. It's covered with these shackles to our past. So they also left us a way to go through this, a way to find it, which has been lost in the West because we've been consumed, not with the inner, with the outer. So, if we look at the great message that they gave us, how you find it, you see it in all the great symbols. This is the caduceus, the staff of Hermes. There are two snakes. One is the inner aspect of healing, the inner way of knowing. The other is the outer. You see, they don't cross very much. It's very difficult to hold inner and outer at the same time. Try our culture. You can be outside like we are all the time, talking about all the things we can do. But rarely do we really go inside to do the inner work. It just doesn't happen, you see, because that's the nature of our culture. But twice in Western civilization, and maybe now again, if we're smart enough, during the Greek period and the Renaissance, you see that wonderful, 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 fragile joining and union of inner and outer. And then you see a burst of creativity, a burst in the arts, a burst in healing. You see the greatness of the human condition. And then you lose it into one or the other. You go into an inner phase or an outer phase, but you have a partial life. So this is the message, inner and outer. Healing, that balance, that harmonious interplay is what is essential for a rich life. It is the foundation for any lifestyle of sustainability. If it is not inside, you cannot build cultures and planets of sustainability. Because you can't do it just by doing. You have to do it by being. If you look at the Eastern model, this is the medicine Buddha. In his right hand, he has the magical aurora plant, signifying all external forms of therapy. In his left hand, he holds the bowl of wisdom, skull cap, traditionally meaning the feet of death, with the elixir of wisdom, inner and outer, both aspects of healing, both cultures, same message, that if you want to really change, you have to be that change, and that has to be an understanding of the inner and outer ways of being, and that's what healing is about. You see it in the great symbols. This is the labyrinth on the floor of Chartres Cathedral, because in the 12th century, 11th century, if you couldn't go to Jerusalem during your life, you simply started on the outside and walked until you got into the inside, inner and outer in the Western tradition, inner and outer in the Eastern tradition. Wherever you go, all the great sages and traditions have given us precisely the same message. And so why is it important when you get inner and outer together, and you really, really do that work and that effort, then you can bring all suffering to an end. Suffering is an acquisition in life. It is not part of the human condition. If you understand the causes of suffering internally, you then can apply the appropriate remedies to bring it all. I'm not talking about suffering that's just gross suffering. I'm talking about dissatisfaction, discontent, unhappiness, a subtle unfulfilled longing. All of these things we feel in our life that we reach out there for, in relationships, in objects, in experiences, in material things, and we'll never get it because it's only temporary in that form. If you really do the work and understand it, understand suffering as they do in the East. And it's not so hard, by the way. It's not complicated at all. It's a lot easier to understand it than it is to suffer. And then, when you remove that, you begin to experience the innate qualities of human life, an enduring and profound happiness that's immune to adversity, a deep peace, serenity that surpasses understanding, a wisdom that knows the depth of being and the nature of reality, a compassion that is just not a nice thing that we do altruistically. It's not empathy. Empathy is a feeling. Compassion is driven by the wisdom that understands that there's needless suffering in the world and I wish to do something about it. These are the qualities that are just naturally there. And that person then becomes the instrument for true transformation. And all great healers, the Gandhis, the Dalai Lamas, and all these people have understood the nature of healing at a deep level. And therefore, they in their being. So for each of us, it becomes incumbent for our own lives, for our own joy, for our own relationships, for our own profound potential to do this work so we can become the most finely tuned and refined instrument for change in the world because of who we are.